nelle fate.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, okay, this afternoon back to the usual format for four whiskies in front of me. What are we looking at today? Well, today we're going to have another look at some bourbons. As you know, I quite enjoy the odd drop of bourbon. Firstly, I'd like to say a big thank you to High Spirits for these samples that we'll be tasting today, and it gives me an opportunity to look at something slightly different. Basically, as you know, with most of the bourbon distilleries, they tend to produce, unlike Scotch distilleries, a range of different brands. Many are old historic brands that have been sort of, the license to produce them has been bought, things like that. I mean, you've got sort of Buffalo Trace, not Buffalo Trace, that's who we're tasting this afternoon. We've got, you got things like Jim Beam that do the Jim Beam. They also do things like Old Crow and Old Grandad, things like that. The historic old brands that have been around for donkey's years. And then you've got distilleries like the Buffalo Trace Distillery, which have over the course of time produced a number of different ranges, and you know, most people are familiar with the standard Buffalo Trace. They're well known, and you know, most people know things like the Eagle Rare range, Sazerac range. So I thought it might be just sort of interesting to look at sort of four of the sort of slightly more unheard of bottlings or brands or whatever you want to call them that the distillery produces, and let's introduce the range then. Right, I decided to taste these not in any particular sort of stylistic reason. I'm just basically going to start with the lowest ABV and work my way up to the highest ABV. So the first one we're looking at this afternoon is called the Hancock's President's Reserve. It's a single barrel bottling and bottled at 44.45%. Second one we're looking at is this one. It's the W.L. Weller 12-year-old. Interesting thing about this particular one is it's a wheated bourbon. So as you know that all bourbons must be at least a minimum of 51% corn, and then you can use rye, wheat, barley, whatever else you want to use. And as you know, sort of the wheated bourbons tend to have a higher percentage of wheat. So it'll be interesting to see what that does to this particular bourbon. The third one we'll be looking at this afternoon is the 1792 Ridgemont Reserve, bottled at 46.85. I believe 1792 was the year Kentucky became a state, and I think it was distilled for that reason or something like that, I think. Probably should have checked, but as per usual, I haven't. And finally, the last one we'll be looking at again is another single barrel bourbon. This one is called the Rock Hill Farms single barrel bourbon and is bottled at 50%. So hopefully this should prove quite an interesting tasting. So shall we crack on and taste the first one then? Right, okay, so this is the Hancock's President's Reserve, like I said, bottled at 44.45. I like how they kind of use these kind of odd ABVs. It tends to sort of make things a bit interesting. So anyway, let's see what the nose gives us then. A lot of oak, plenty of oak. Very fresh, quite sort of almost French oak in character. It's got that sort of tightly grained sort of vanilla character, a bit of violet, some nice spicy rye. I believe this is a fairly high rye content bourbon, and you certainly get Get some really nice spiciness from the rye. There's a little bit of slightly spirit character. Can't remember how old this is. I don't think I've got a note of it, but I would guess it's not hugely old. I mean, I would probably say it's somewhere between maybe sort of 5 and 8 years old. A little bit of smoke again, some violet character coming through. It's got an edge. It's got those rye spices give it sort of, you know, a real edgy kind of feel to it. Quite earthy. And although initially it seemed like there was a lot of oak, it's now kind of quite settled down a bit, and the oak is not quite so in your face, so to speak. It still has that kind of sort of slightly custardy kind of vanilla, that sort of almost kind of like I said, almost like French oak, a sort of creaminess. But those rye spices are absolutely gorgeous, really, really nice. Palate them. A lot of spice, a lot of rye. Gently oaked, sort of opens up with the rye spices, a sort of bit of licorice, a little bit of toffee, some clove. Gets a bit bitter. There's a lot of bittering oak, certainly on the middle and the finish. On the finish, it does give a little bit of sort of dark chocolate. It's full. It's like I say, it's not overly oaked. The oak is, it's kind of sitting in the background. It's not big and sweet. There's a little bit of toasted corn comes through on the finish, and so it's not too sweet. Yeah, lovely, spicy, nice grip. A little bit too much bitterness, I think, on the finish for my liking. A little bit of orange now on the aftertaste. A little bit of almost kind of not marmalade, maybe a little bit of conserve. But yeah, that's it's not bad. Like I said, I think it's got a little bit too much bitterness on the finish, and it could have possibly done with a little bit more sweetness just to balance that out. But yeah, on the whole, not too bad. Right, on to the WL Weller 12-year-old then. Like I said, this is a wheated bourbon, so let's see what how different this is to the first one. So there's some crumbly spice, some cinnamon. It's darker. It's got a sort of a dark wheat flake kind of character. Bit of treacly molasses, licorice. Really dark, really interesting. Oh, some nice, almost herbally kind of spice character coming out now. Again, not sort of overly oaked. Again, the oak is kind of sitting in the background. It's kind of giving some structure to the nose. Not a huge amount of vanillins, but so you know, it's more about the spirit character per se. Wonderfully herbal. I really like wheated bourbons. I like that sort of wheaty flake kind of nose, and this is very, very good. Like I say, it's really got a really dark kind of molassy, spicy nose. Oh, this is good. Palate. Ooh, that's mouth-filling. Again, it's got that kind of wheaty stroke bran flakes kind of dark, treacly mouth-filling. That's good. I like that. Little bit of spice, not too much oak again. The oak kind of is nicely sort of sat in the background. Not too bitter on the finish. Little bit of dried fruit. Little bit of dark chocolate. Oh, that's full. That's a big bourbon. It has to be said. Not creamy, but it's got a nice kind of soft, rounded palate with enough of an edginess and a spiciness just to sort of like, you know, stop it becoming a bit too flabby and what have you. So that is exceptionally good. I remember tasting that once before and being really impressed. And the previous bottling of it, which I think was a 7-year-old, I think, or something like that. So I mean, possibly they've upped the age statement, but it's got a nice maturity to it as well. Really harmonious, really nicely balanced. That's good. Like that. Right, okay, on to the 1792 Ridgemont Reserve. Now, I think I'm right in saying that this one isn't actually distilled at the Buffalo Trace Distillery. It's distilled at the Barton Brand Distillery in Bardstown, which is owned by Sazerac Company. And again, it's another relatively high rye content bourbon, so bottled at slightly higher strength of 46.85 and apparently 8 years old. So let's see what the nose gives us then. Now this is more your kind of standard probably is the wrong word, but this is more archetypal bourbon. It's soft, it's corn fat, it's sweet, popcorn, honey, thick, sweet, creamy oak. There's a little bit of spice. I mean, you wouldn't have pegged this for a high rye content bourbon, it has to be said. It's certainly not got the spiciness of the Hancocks. It's a bit sweet. It's not totally flabby. It's just all a bit, you know. I mean, yeah, there's a nice violety note. There's a bit of spice, but it's really quite sweet. And it's just corn fat. Yeah, thankfully, it's not got that sort of burnt, sort of caramelly kind of note. I mean, it's certainly good spirit, and it's possibly because I like the higher rye content bourbons. I like a bit more spice, a bit more intensity. I'm not the world's biggest fan of the big fat corny ones, and this certainly falls into the big fat corny character. So yeah. Anyway, I mean, it's not bad. There's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just my personal preference, shall we say? So palate. Okay, yeah, it's again quite corn fat, a lot of caramel, a lot of corn. You do get some really nice, quite lazy spices on the edge of the tongue. It's certainly not a kind of with the spices. They're very subtle. They're very soft. Not a great deal of bitterness. It's a bit simple. It's a bit straightforward. There's not a huge amount of progression. It is pleasant, it is well made. It kind of goes on and unfolds a little bit, but like I said, it's a little bit on the simple side. Quite drying. That's probably more down to the ABV than the oak. I feel. And yeah, it's okay. Not going to rubbish it, but I think so far it's probably the least impressive of the three that we've tasted so far. So there you go. Right, and finally the Rock Hill Farms single barrel. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? It's a very subtle nose. It's got a bit of maturity. There's some creamy oak. No, not creamy oak. There's some oak. It's a little bit creamy, but it's got again. It's not sort of. It's kind of sat in the background again. It's got some pepper, a little bit of spice. It's more of that kind of woody, kind of crumbly spice, rather than the sort of the intense rye spice. It's round, it's full, and it's got a bit of toasted corn. It's a very subtle nose. It's really taking some time to kind of get going, shall we say. It's quite sweet. There's a little bit of citrus character. Yeah, it's okay. Again, it's not bad, but it's just very, very subtle. Or is that innocuous? Possibly. I don't know. It's one of those things, isn't it? Subtlety or it's got some spirit character. Little bit of herbalness. About then. It's got a bit of a drying finish. Again, probably more down to the alcohol. The palate is subtle. Again, you can argue is it subtle? Is it simplistic? Is it innocuous? You know, it's fairly sweet. It's got some nice spices. The rye is starting to come through on the very finish, giving it quite a tingling, spicy finish. But it's a bit, you know, it's sort of not flabby, but it's kind of a bit, again, simplistic, sweet. There's some pleasant grip to it. I mean, it's not bad. It's not a bad bourbon at all. Like I said, I mean, it's got quite a bit of sort of banana-y, sort of toffeed fruit. More of that sort of toasted caramel kind of corn character. Not quite sort of like burnt caramel, but very sort of quite toasted caramel. Yeah, it's okay. It's not sort of, you know, lighting my fire, so to speak. But I think as a bourbon, it's really well made, and it's of that kind of style. So yeah, not too bad. Right, okay, so let's sum this up then. 4 really interesting bourbons, I think you'll agree, and hopefully, you know, this will tempt you into trying some of the more obscure brands that Buffalo Trace do, or just look beyond the obvious bourbons that are out on the market. Hancock's Reserve, yeah, that's nice. It's not too bad. It's a bit bitter on the finish. But it's got some lovely punchy rye spices, a really nice intensity, and yeah, I think sort of all round that is not bad at all. The W.O. Weller 12-year-old, well, for me the standout bottling of these 4, I love that sort of, you know, dark, treacly, wheaty character. It's unusual, it's different, and I think that's what interests me most about these styles of bourbons. Why I like that, I mean, you know, your basic bourbon, you know, it's corn fat, it's you know, popcorn, all that kind of sort of stuff. And you go, yeah, okay, it's sweet. I mean, at the bottom end, you've got things like, the old number 7, although not being a bourbon, I know, but of that style, and it's basically oak and sweet corn, and that's pretty much about it. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got your things like Sazerac 18, stuff like that. Really interesting. Your Thomas H. Handy, which has that sort of intensity of spicy rye, and then you've got the William Weller LaRue, the uber expensive wheated bourbon that the Buffalo Trace do, which is just absolutely stunning. And this, I think if memory serves me correct, is not very expensive. It is probably about 40 quid a bottle, and I think sort of like, value for money wise, this is absolutely fantastic. Like I say, it's not got obviously the complexity of the William Weller LaRue, but certainly it gives you a really interesting insight into wheated bourbons. The Ridgemont Reserve, yeah, okay, it's pleasant. It's a bit straightforward for my tasting. It's a well-made bourbon. Can't say that it isn't, but I find it a little bit simplistic, and I don't think it's particularly cheap. I think it's somewhere in your mid-50s, and for that kind of money, I just want something with a little bit more complexity. Pretty much, I think the same can be said for the Rock Hill Farms. Again, not a bad bourbon in that style of corn fat bourbons, which a number of people like. Again, I don't think for me there's enough complexity. I know that I think that Jim Murray kind of really rates it, and I think he rates the 1792 as well. And I think as far as kind of bourbons go, they're good. They're not bad bourbons. They're by any stretch of the imagination. But I think when you're starting to get into this sort of like 50 to sort of 80 quid kind of mark, just below the sort of the things like the George T. Stagg and the sort of Sazerac 18 and things like that. You want some complexity, you want some interest. You don't just want, or I don't just want, it's subtle, it's interesting, it kind of meanders its merry little way. I want complexity. I want it to go, yeah, I'm glad I spent 60 odd quid on this bottle of whiskey. And neither of these two kind of give it to me. These two do to a certain extent. This definitely does, and like I said, at sort of around about 40 quid, I think it's got to be sort of a real steal. So there you go. That's my opinion on these. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the show, and once again, I hope it sort of makes you want to go and sort of dig out some of these bourbons, give them a try, look beyond the sort of the basic kind of stuff, and just see what's out there, because there's some lovely American whiskies out and about there. So anyway, I think that's probably enough of my waffling. So I hope you enjoyed the show. Good dramming. Good afternoon.